Hello friends, in today's video I am going to be talking about and working in the Crescent Render Marker Sketchbook. I have been using this sketchbook since the beginning of this year, and you've probably seen it in action already from other YouTube videos or my Instagram live streams, and needless to say, I really enjoy using it. What inspired me to try out this sketchbook was actually another artist here on YouTube who goes by Ree. She works with alcohol markers quite a bit and was often using this sketchbook. And the unique thing about this marker paper is that it is meant to be completely bleed proof so that you can use both sides of the page with alcohol-based markers. If you have any experience with other marker papers, you'll probably know that the marker is often visible on the other side. So one of my goals this year was to work in a sketchbook more often, and I was very inspired by many other artists who were doing really great sketchbook spreads that would span across both pages. So I figured that this sketchbook would be the perfect fit since I typically would go for sketchbooks that had a spiral bound. And so having the perfect bound sketchbook allows me to do that spread across the two pages. And as you can see, I started out my sketches like always using a red erasable colored pencil. I choose to use this over a graphite pencil because that way it doesn't smudge and muddy up the markers when I begin coloring. The paper is a cool off-white with a decent thickness compared to most marker papers I've used in the past. I find that oftentimes, at least with the ones that I've used, a lot of marker papers, while have that coating that's meant for markers, they are often quite thin. And so this marker paper, yeah, it's just got like a bit more weight to it, which I really like. And of course, it is very smooth, which makes the markers glide along the surface really nicely. But I find that it's not so smooth that it can't handle colored pencils, which is perfect for the kind of technique that I typically use. And something that you'll probably have noticed is that the markers appear darker when it's initially put down and then lightens as it dries. This is something that I've gotten used to now, and so I always make a little test swatch beforehand so that I know what the color is actually going to look like. Which honestly I recommend you do with any paper regardless, since the color of the cap on alcohol-based markers are often not accurate to the actual color anyways. Also, as a side note, I guess it might be worth mentioning that this first portrait that I'm drawing here, I used a reference photo of Rupi Kaur, who is a beautiful writer / poet. And I just thought that this profile photo of her was so gorgeous and very distinct. And I've been wanting to continue practicing drawing profiles anyways, so it just kind of all fit perfectly together when I came across this photo of her. And so now back to the sketchbook. I've owned alcohol markers for many years now and have tried multiple different brands and multiple different papers, but for some reason I just found them to be a really challenging medium for me to use, and for a while I just kind of assumed that it was a medium that was going to continue to be elusive to me and that I just never would get the hang of it, and I couldn't find like the right combination of marker to paper. And yeah, I think the big thing about it was I was trying to mimic manga artists and styles similar to that in the way that they render beautifully smooth shading and gradients with the markers, but it was just not something that I could manage to replicate myself. And then eventually I began to use colored pencils on top of the markers, and that just like completely changed the game for me. I mean, for a long time, I actually also thought that this technique was quote unquote cheating, but I then realized that there's really no hard and fast rules about how one should use markers. So once I finally got over that weird notion, I pretty much have been doing this marker and color pencil mixed media approach ever since. And for those of you who've seen my 15-year art journey video here on YouTube, you'll already know that my main medium for many years in high school was colored pencils. They were my jam, and to this day is probably the medium I actually am most comfortable with. I just find that it's very predictable. I know what to expect, and there's really no learning curve, I feel like, when I pick up colored pencils, even if I haven't used them for a while. But because of the way that the medium is, they are very tedious to work with, to, layer and layer to build up those colors. And so now that I use markers as the base, it really makes the illustration look so much richer and also just saves a lot of time as well. The great thing about this marker sketchbook is that I find the paper absorbs the marker really, really well, which makes getting like a smooth, flat area coverage a lot easier. I used to always have a really hard time with getting really obvious streaks with my markers when I use other papers. And while, of course, my technique is not perfect, there is still a little bit of streakiness. I do find that there's something about this paper that helps smooth out those streaks a lot better, and it sometimes has this very light speckling look, which I actually really enjoy. It kind of reminds me of when you use like the noise filter on a digital illustration. It's just got this like, it's not actual texture, but it kind of gives it a little bit of a texture look. The second drawing that I'm working on here, I used this photo as a reference for the pose, and then for her outfit, I was inspired by this fit that I came across on Pinterest. I have been really into the trend of corsets or corset-like tops paired with oversized dress shirts. I just think that it's a really fun clash of traditionally feminine and masculine fashion pieces coming together. And because of that kind of combination, I also decided to give this girl a pixie cut, since short hair on women is something that I don't draw very often, and so it felt like the perfect hairstyle to go with this outfit. Oh, and as I'm sure people will be wondering, the markers that I'm using in today's video are by ArtX, who were so kind to send them to me for free. This video is not sponsored, by the way, but I thought that was worth mentioning. And if you've seen my Instagram live streams, you'll probably know that I'm not very picky or brand loyal when it comes to alcohol-based markers. It's never been my main medium, and I just use them fairly casually in sketchbooks and whatnot. And I think that because of the way that I use them, aka just flat, solid areas with minimal shading, certain features that some marker illustrators that would typically be looking for, like color blending or achieving gradients, those kinds of things just aren't a big concern for me, because that's just not the way that I use the markers. And yeah, I think I own quite a few different brands. I have Prismacolor, Winsor & Newton, Shinhan, and a couple Copic markers. And honestly, they kind of all feel very similar to me. I think the biggest difference is the nibs, since some of them have a brush tip and some have a chisel tip. Brush marker tips are definitely really nice because they allow you the flexibility of the width of your stroke, which is great for those smaller detailed areas and just allows you to get more control over where you're laying down the color. But again, since I'm mainly going for flat areas, using a chisel tip marker works more or less totally fine for me. I do find that having the other end of the marker be a fine tip definitely helps if I need to reach, tinier, smaller areas. As for the colored pencils, I am using both Faber-Castell's Polychromos pencils as well as the Prismacolor Premiere color pencils. I often get asked by people which one I prefer, and honestly, it's hard for me to choose between the two of them. I find that the Faber-Castell ones have a thicker, harder lead, which makes them very strong, and it allows you to sharpen them to a really nice fine point for crisp edges and details. You can also see that I even use them for line art throughout these illustrations as well. Then on the flip side, the Prismacolor pencils have a much softer lead, which makes them more prone to breaking, but the pigmentation makes for really beautiful color payoff and excellent for blending. So they both serve different purposes, which is why I really enjoy using both of them together. And honestly, I would have a hard time picking one over the other. But I will say that the Prismacolor ones are the ones that I have used the longest. I bought like a huge set of them when I was in high school, and I think a lot of the pencils that I have now are probably from that set I bought in high school, since colored pencils last a really long time. And speaking of sets, I sometimes get asked about my thoughts on buying a small versus large set of colored pencils. If I remember correctly, I got the 48 set of Prismacolor pencils when I was in high school, and then the Faber-Castell set, I think I got a similar count as well many, many years later. And so whether you should buy a small or large set is definitely up to you depending on your budget or how often you think you'll use them. I really enjoy having many colors to choose from, and like I mentioned earlier, they really do last more or less forever. It's not like paints where they may dry out over time or anything like that. So if you have the budget for it, I think it's not a bad idea to get a larger set, because that way you just kind of purchase it once and then you have them for a really long time, as opposed to buying a small set and then after the fact realizing, oh, maybe I should have gotten a bigger set. But by the time you purchase the small set, you don't want to upgrade and buy a set again, because you'll get a lot of repeats. But that being said, if you are on a tighter budget or you're not sure if you'll use them much, maybe it is a better idea to get a smaller set. Again, it just really depends on you and your situation. But I think nearly every art supply store I've ever been in will carry these colored pencils individually as well. So you can always add more to your collection over time if you do end up getting a smaller set. And this is something I've definitely done over the years anyways, whether it is to replace a pencil that I've used up or to pick up a color that I don't already have. Which, by the way, as a side note, I definitely recommend getting a pencil extender. They are a great way to get more use out of your pencils once they start getting really short. But again, I find that my colored pencils last such a long time, and it's only been a handful of times where my pencils have actually gotten really, really short to use the pencil extender. But it's very, very handy to have. And for this third drawing, similar to the previous one, I used one photo as a reference for the pose, and then I got the outfit inspiration from another photo. In this case, I was inspired by this runway outfit from a Fenty collection. It's another case of two different pieces that initially you think would clash, and yet somehow it really appeals to me. And as you can probably have seen in the process, I kind of debated on what color I wanted the dress to be and whether or not I wanted to attempt the plaid pattern. But in the end, I just ended up making it like one solid dark gray, because I felt like it created a better contrast with the light colored sweater. And I really enjoy how this particular girl came out. I think now that fall is starting to roll in, I'm already in like the Halloween mindset. And so that's why I gave her little like bat hair clips, I guess you would call them. I don't know. But yeah, I think I'm already like getting into the autumn/fall mode. Then for this last drawing, I basically just tried to stick to colors I already used throughout the other illustrations. That way the page could have a somewhat cohesive color palette. I didn't really have a color palette in mind when I went in with this sketchbook page. I was just sort of going with the flow. And I also think that by this point I was kind of losing steam. And so when I was doing this final portrait, I was kind of in the mindset of just get it done and over with so that I can finally start editing this video. But you know, this is meant to be a very light, casual, no pressure thing in my sketchbook. And so it's okay that, I didn't spend nearly as much time on it as the rest. And something that was totally unintentional, but now I can't unsee it now after I finished it. But yeah, when I finished the illustration, I couldn't help but think, She looked like if Mia Wallace, Uma Thurman's character from Pulp Fiction, and Katara from Avatar: The Last Airbender had a baby, and this is what she would look like. I know it's like the most random combination, but I just like can't unsee it now. I think that, yeah, the hairstyle and something about the face really reminds me of Uma Thurman. And then, of course, the color palette and the choker really gives me Katara vibes. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's really funny. Oh, and something that should be worth noting about this sketchbook is that while I do use colored pencils on it all the time, there is a limitation on how much colored pencil this paper can take. If you're an experienced colored pencil artist, you'll probably know that typically papers that have a bit of texture or tooth to it are the ideal paper for pencils. The reason for that is because when there's some tooth to the surface, the little grooves in the paper are able to catch the pencil pigment better and allow you to use many layers on top of it. But since this is a smooth marker paper, you are not able to use as many layers on it because it just reaches a certain point where the surface becomes ultra smooth and almost shiny. And so that's kind of it reaches its point where it just can't take any more layers like a toothy paper normally would be able to. And another thing about this sketchbook is that it doesn't lay perfectly flat. And if a paper has a lot of markers, it will curl slightly. But I don't find this to be a huge deal because this is something that I typically do with my watercolor sketchbooks anyways, is use a little bulldog clip on the edge to keep the page perfectly flat. It's just something that I've been accustomed to with most of my sketchbooks anyways, so I don't find it a really big deal. But I thought it was worth mentioning since that might be something that you guys would be concerned about. And then lastly, even though the paper claims to be completely bleed proof, it does bleed a little bit to the other side. You can kind of see there's a little bit of speckling, but not nearly as much as other sketchbooks I've used in the past. Then before we go, I would like to give a huge shout out to KATRINA, who was so kind to send me some prints and stickers of her beautiful artwork. When I got the notification that my P.O. box had a package, I was so curious what it could be since I wasn't expecting any mail for a little bit. And to my absolute joy, I got this surprise package from her. I especially love this Chinese zodiac series of illustrations that she did. They all have rounded corners, which I really love. I think that's such a nice little touch. And they're all printed on this glittery paper, or it's got like a glittery sheen to them. It's so unique and really, really beautiful. I really love it. And she wrote me a really sweet card and expressed to me that normally she attends artist alleys to sell her work, but as you guys probably know, the pandemic has really put a lot of people out of their usual work. And I personally really love doing artist alleys as well. So I really empathize with this loss of revenue and that kind of unique connection that you have with your audience when you attend conventions. And so if you guys are interested, I'll have KATRINA's Instagram and shop listed in the description down below if you want to check out more of her beautiful artwork. Like, look at these holographic glittery stickers. They're so pretty and so fun. I absolutely love it. And her work is so detailed. I'm really, really impressed by it. And yeah, that concludes my video for today. I hope that you guys found it interesting and fun to watch this sketchbook page come to life. Thank you so much to KATRINA for your beautiful artwork. And thank you to you guys for watching and always leaving such lovely comments on my videos. I really, really appreciate it. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.